SiriusXM. Bloody Roots. Reverend Ian Christie is about to begin. Bloody Roots. Please turn to page 666. From the pages of Sound of the Beast, your weekly heavy metal history lesson with Ian Christie.
Hey, cool cats and swinging sisters, what's hip? What's happening? Welcome to Roots of Jazz and Metal on SiriusXM. I'm Ian Christie, today bringing you the way out sounds of Octopus, Convulsive, Tripalium, Lefty Fish, Yakuza, Effelduath, Candiria, the Flying Lutenbachers, Painkiller, and of course, Norway's black jazz specialists, Shining. Up, up, and away, this is Roots on SiriusXM. Helter Skelter by Norway's Shining, not to be confused with the Swedish black metal band Shining, and pretty much the perfect collision of jazz music and metal. That song recorded live off the live Black Jazz live set, because I wanted to establish one thing from the beginning of this metal history lesson. The musicians we're hearing today on Roots of Metal and Jazz are the real deal. These are jazz-trained musicians or metal-trained musicians taking their imaginations, the musical complexity to the hilt, going completely wild, free, and delivering the goods. It's up to you and me to support these efforts, because we live in an overly plasticized world where people complain about Pro Tools and canned sounds and repetitious, boring metal records. Well, today the adventure begins. We'll hear tracks going back to the 1990s by bands like Painkiller, Duath, and Candiria, plus brand new experiments in extreme jazz by the Flying Lutenbachers and Switzerland's Convulsive. A ton of tracks today mining the gamut from jazz played very aggressively to metal played with a heavy free jazz influence. Tempos shifting. All kinds of instrumentation from the jazz realm, mainly saxophones and some other horns. And overall, just an improvisational sense of adventure, a bunch of bands on a mission to rebuild jazz and metal in a more fluid, aggressive form. This is Roots, your weekly metal history lesson. I'm Ian Christie, who wrote Sound of the Beast, the complete headbanging history of heavy metal. I'm also the publisher of books like Choosing Death, the improbable history of grindcore and death metal by Decibel editor Albert Mudrian, other books like Swedish Death Metal, Metallion the Slayer Mag Diaries, Murder in the Front Row, shots from the Bay Area thrash metal epicenter. Visit Bazillion Points online, bazillionpoints.com, or at Bazillion Points, and support this show while becoming the mightiest metal brain on the block. This influence of jazz and metal does go back to the very beginning. So much jazzy, free, breakbeat playing in the drumming of Bill Ward on the very first Black Sabbath albums. This was not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He was always swinging, always moving the beat around, always keeping a shifty, playful, exploratory edge to his drumming that locked in with the bass playing of Geezer Butler and kept Black Sabbath very unique among 1970s hard rock bands. Of course, hard rock and jazz melded together in many ways in the 1970s. Countless bands out of Scandinavia exploring the outer reaches of jazz melded with hard rock music. Of course, the infamous Mahavishnu Orchestra taking it to kind of elevated heights in the United States. Not to mention the influence of jazz weirdos like Frank Zappa, whose influence as a guitar player always on the periphery of the heavy metal world. But I'm going to say it's the early 1990s when metal is fully mature, even the underground wave of thrash metalers reaching commercial peaks at the early 1990s. People started to look around for something different. The music had been around for over 20 years already and started to hear industrial fusion. You started to hear funk infused into metal, and you started to get these serious efforts by jazz musicians mingling with metalheads, like in this next band, Painkiller. John Zorn, an anchor of the downtown New York avant-garde jazz scene, teaming up with Napalm Death drummer Mick Harris and longtime avant-garde producer Bill Laswell. This band is called Painkiller and first appeared on Earache Records at the dawn of the 1990s. Right after that, a band that's been around equally as long, Weasel Walter's Flying Lutenbachers, originally based in Illinois. Relentless, aggressive jazz music played by people who knew metal music inside and out. Brand new music off their Shattered Existence record in 5 minutes. Then something by Brooklyn's Candiria, another astonishingly pure fusion of jazz music and ultra-physical, tough hardcore. Let's get bopping, man. I'm Ian Christie. You're listening to Roots, your weekly metal history lesson. This is Painkiller on SiriusXM. Yeah, Effelduoth out of Italy. Another Eric Records band from not that long ago, but sadly kind of disappeared after producing just a couple of astonishingly genre-bending metal albums, including that heavily jazz-influenced record, The Painter's Palette. I'm Ian Christie, and this is Roots, your weekly metal history lesson, here on SiriusXM. Every week exploring a different country, a different style or sound in metal, different key figures, or different themes that run throughout the great vast fabric of metal history. This week I urge you to grab your nearby metal skeptic, whoever it is, a music teacher, an elder, an uncle, somebody who thinks that this stuff is greasy kid stuff and never will amount to anything, and lords it over you day in and day out about the real contributions of jazz musicians or some supposedly higher level of music. Well, let the lording stop here. This show is ripe with highly skilled jazz players, not at all condescending to play metal, but saying, listen, this is a challenging, interesting kind of music. I want to try my hand. I want to see if I can play what these untrained kids are playing in their garages. Likewise, musicians that have grown up with jazz training, but their hearts belong to metal, letting it all hang out naturally in the form of the tracks we just heard and what's coming up by bands like Isan, Conflux, and Tropalium from France. I made a pretty solid effort this week to not bring you just genre-hopping bands that play 10 seconds of bluegrass, 10 seconds of jazz, 10 seconds of folk music, and then go back into some other kind of hyper-spastic metallic breakdown. Tried to go with what to me sounds like natural jazz metal hybrids. So some more recent examples coming up in the next few minutes. A Swiss band called Convulsive I had a chance to see not long ago. Astonishing delivery, fully masked, fully dark lights, just nothing but total onslaught of jazz and well-poised metal. Something by Conflux, another Chicago-based jazz metal band. And the bebop-influenced French metal band Tropalium, who not only take jazz music into metal, but kind of a more basic, rudimentary form of jazz music. So really going back and knowing their jazz roots as well as the metal roots. Not to mention, of course, Norwegian maestro Isan, the former frontman of Emperor, who joined forces with a member of Norway's Shining to create the After record. Something from that in about 5 minutes' time. Another one of the fine examples of jazz and metal on this week's metal history lesson, Roots. Fusion pushed here to the absolute maximum limit. This is a band called Octopus from their Into the Void of Fear release. I'm Ian Christie. Thank you for joining me. This is Roots on SiriusXM.
pages of your heavy metal history lesson. Bloody Roots. Liquid metal! XM with Ian Christie. Bloody Roots. Liquid Metal!
There it is, relentlessly swinging, groovy French jazz metal fusion band Tripalium from about 10 years back. Song called Sick Boogie Murder from the Alchemic Clockwork of Disorder. At the very end of that song, breaking it down to basically like coffee house jazz trio. How much more basic and obvious can you get? People come to this metal world from many, many different places, either from local traditional folk music tradition in whatever corner of the world they live in. Sometimes they come from pop music. Sometimes they come from metal itself, raised on Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. But it could be so many different avenues leading in to the heart of the metal organism. And this week it's metalheads whose skills got so advanced that they began to start to dabble in jazz, then brought that back into metal. And whether we're talking about Candiria or Octopus or Tripalium, you take away the distortion and the heaviness, you can feel the swing, the playful changing tempos that emanate from jazz, not so much from the relentless pounding of heavy metal. And it's a challenge to kind of take something like that and make it heavy. Did it work? Let me know. I'm at Ian Christie or at Bazillion Points. The playlist is online at roots.bazillionpoints.com. And you can read a little bit more about jazz metal in my book, Sound of the Beast, The Complete Headbanging History of Heavy Metal, available at Bazillionpoints.com, along with Swedish death metal, Choosing Death, heavy metal movies, and the brand new teen movie Hell, examining the mostly 1980s world of bikini-snatching dogs and tighty-whities flying up on flagpoles. It's all at Bazillionpoints.com. I guess we put the coda on this week's exploration of jazz and metal with a 90-second track by Indonesia's Lefty Fish, the current state-of-the-art in short attention span disorder, hyperspeed, jazz-inflected metal, and then not wanting to leave on a 90-second blur, a classic jazz-inflected metal track by Chicago's Yakuza. Thanks very, very much for joining me. I hope at the same time that today's show brings in some jazz heads to the world of metal and also sends metalheads out in search of great jazz albums by acts like Naked City or Ornette Coleman. This crazed crew from Indonesia got the message. It's Lefty Fish. Thank you very, very much for joining me today. I'll see you again soon. Know your roots!
Yeah! Ian Christie's Bloody Roots, Liquid Metal's hour-long crash course in headbanger history.